Alrighty, so this is going to be the match for third place between Jeff and Alex, the Huuj versus young Hoodie Al. Should be a good one. We're going to be having a bird's eye view, having a look at both players' hands and talking through what should they be doing, what should they be looking for. So in just a second, we're going to get into this. Both players looking at their starting hand. Alrighty, so we have Demacia Freljord, Garen Ashe versus Ashe Sejuani Tryndamere. Both of these are kind of overwhelm concepts. Both of them are going to be wanting to rush and develop overwhelm big units as fast as possible. So the biggest thing both players are going to be looking for is going to be controlling the board early and establishing a better board of units before their bigger things come down. Looking at Jeff's hand, already he has the Ursine Spirit Walker, which is going to be his main source of getting overwhelmed, spreading overwhelm throughout the entire board. Alex already having Kato in hand, having Ashe in hand, and a couple of combat tricks for his trouble. Develops into the Trifarian Glory Seeker. You don't really want to take that attack. You don't need to trade the chicken for the Trifarian. At this point, if you're Alex, you're probably wishing you had a little bit more of your early game curve. Not a ton you can do at this point. Probably going to be looking to develop the Ashe. Ashe comes down. Starting to get that early Frostbite, he will be able to take out the chicken for free here, unless he plays something bigger. Jeff has the power to get rid of that, but right now he is going to be threatening losing the Ashe, as the Ashe is going to get pulled here if they attack with Ashe Trifarian, which young Hoodie has no reason not to. Jeff emoting potentially that he made a mistake.
You are mine.
Debating whether or not to attack with the Ashe, it looks like. Considering using the Culling Strike. Yep. Attacking with both is the right play here. Both players do have combat tricks. Probably Jeff's Ashe is going to go down, whether it's to a Culling Strike or to this Trifarian. Yep, Brittle Steel comes down. Simple option, and again, the Culling Strike will come out here. Just a second. The block on the Ashe makes sense. In this matchup, you're going to want to protect your health, especially knowing that both are looking for these big overwhelm damage. So no reason to pre-commit the Culling Strike. Seeing if Jeff's going to do anything else does have its perks. There's a chance that he does want to hold on to it, although this is going to be pretty good value for getting rid of the Ashe. Jeff passes over. Ending the round, not taking out the Ashe. Interesting move. Jeff drawing into another Omen Hawk. Yep. So that's a free attack unless you're going to be doing any kind of combat tricks. Alex regretting probably not popping the Culling Strike, but plenty of opportunities to get that. Going down to 12 is not great against this deck, especially when the Plunder will activate the Spirit Walker.
Lead the target.
Blocks with the Ashe. It's an interesting play. Not really sure what the thought process is doing that. Develops into the Kato. He does prevent the damage and prevents the Plunder. However, it's quite a lot of value for one of your champions to go down like that.
There is truth in blood.
So Jeff missing out on the transformation into the Stormclaw. It does require Plunder. It does require you to attack the enemy or damage the enemy nexus for that to go off of. Probably should have held on to that, either developing into the Remembrance or to the second Omen Hawk. Probably would have been a stronger move there. Alex looking at developing the Sejuani into attack, or wanting to go for a Minotaur Reckoner.
Go time!
For glory.
Ends up electing to go with the Kato attack on the Ashe.
Face
Oh.
me.
pulls it back. A little indecisive. Develops the Sejuani.
Pain is nothing.
Develops the Sejuani onto the Ursine. Ursine doesn't really pose a ton of threat at this point. I'm kind of wondering why he didn't pull the Ash. Perhaps he thinks that he's going to do something with it, or he has a way to deal with Ash later. But overall, Ursine's not really providing that much of a threat. Jeff has the option right here to go for the Winter's Breath, which completely would stop this attack. Looks like he goes for it. This is a solid play. This completely frostbites everyone and opens up play for the Shatter if he had 1 additional mana. Unfortunately, he doesn't. This does flip Ash though, so he will be drawing. Into the Crystal Arrow on the next turn, which is gonna frostbite 1 unit. Most of them have more than 1 health, but is also going to, more importantly, flip Ash so that frostbite units or units with 0 attack are not gonna be able to block. It's a good play. It's a smart choice there for sure. Looking at his hand, he also has the Icy Yeti, which, if Alex does develop further, will prevent more enemies from blocking, so long as that they're not as strong. So at this point, he does have a Kato attack if he wanted to kill something, but it doesn't look like he'll elect to go for it. Kind of stopped dead in his tracks. Crystal Arrow could come down if he wants to draw. Probably would want to Avaros and Hearthguard instead and get some more unit presence, kind of bulk up his board a little bit. Alex now looking at multiple trick hands. He's got four tricks in his hand, 2 Brittle Seals and 2 Calling Strikes. At this point, it's going to be hard to use unless he's chump blocking anything. Probably trying to get the Minotaur Reckoner down to permanently stun that Ash would be better. But he may need to develop into the 3-drop to get that bigger Yeti on board. Electing to go for the Crystal Ice Arrow here. If he does swing in, he will be freezing the Kato, and Alex will not have a blocker.
A gift from Avarosa.
Yep. Sith-3 doesn't do a ton for this board state. So at this point, the Minotaur Reckoner is going to be the one being stunned, meaning that the Kato could potentially, what Jeff could look at right now is filling up his board, dropping the Sithria, and then using the slow Frostbite on one of the 2 units, and then his entire board would be frozen. Looks like Jeff is onto that, as we'll see if no one really runs this card. If the Shatter comes down next turn. Calling Strike, trying to save a little bit of damage, makes sense for the position that Alex is in, kind of in trouble for this attack. At this point, the Shatter does make sense to Frostbite. You could also use it to clear. Elects to use it to get a little bit extra damage onto the Sejuani. Unfortunately, that is going to open him up to, if he does try to attack this turn, that there still will be something that can threaten the Ash. Jeff forgoes the attack. Again, a stronger move there would have been to completely frostbite the entire board. A Shatter on the 6/6 and an attack with the Ash would have frozen the remaining units, and he would have gotten 11, 13 damage in for free. Tavern Keeper brings up the Sejuani back to full health. At this point, again, Alex is stuck on heavy trick hands that probably should have been used earlier. At this point, he does have more units on the board, although the board state is kind of more so in the favor of Jeff, just for having the flipped Ash on board. Yeti comes down. He elects to use the Kato buffs on the Trifarian Glory Seeker. And this is going to be a pretty big swing in for Alex. At this point, Alex still does have mana. We could see a Calling Strike come in. We could see a Brittle Steel. Doing this does drop Ash within Brittle Steel range. You could see a Brittle Steel and Calling Strike coming out in the following turn. Alex running out of time to make this decision.
Face me.
Pulls the Ash. Again, that is going to threaten the Ash into Brittle Steel range. Favorable trade for Jeff on the Kato block and completely get rid of Sejuani. It's not really a good reason to block with anything else. He doesn't really have any other units that can block, and this Omen Hawk is going to do a really good job of taking those stuns. Calling Strike comes down. This is going to change the target of the Minotaur Reckoner from the Omen Hawk to the Ursine Spirit Walker. Again, the Ursine Spirit Walker not flipped isn't going to be having a lot of impact on it. Icefield Archer is a great top deck here that can be used on any of these units to provide just more pressure attacking with this Ash. It would have been nice to see one more Frostbite trick come out, but unfortunately, not seeing any. There is an argument to just develop and wait for a Harsh Winds, wait for a couple other Frostbite tricks before being able to swing in. At this point, all favorable trades will be coming from Alex, just having bigger bodies and beefier bodies on board. At this point, 2 Yetis are within the top 3 cards of the deck, so we could see some 5/5s coming down. Again, Alex on a trick-heavy hand. Not a ton he can really do here. If he did want to get rid of the Ash here, he could Brittle Steel into a Culling Strike. But it would also put him on a 1-card hand. Culling Strike goes onto the 3/3.
No regrets.
5-mana Remembrance could be good too. Not sure about the Icefield Archer play. It's kind of a what are you really getting here off of that? Attacking with the 5/5 will clear one of the 3/3s. But unfortunately won't do too much more than that. Round 10, both players enlightened. Full mana for both of them. Drawing a second Ash is pretty good. At this point, probably developing Remembrance after a death would be good. At this point, Alex's open attack isn't too terribly strong. The one downside of pulling Remembrance pre-combat is if you draw into Radiant Guardian, you're not going to get the tough or the lifesteal buff. Yep. And again, the one downside, you do miss out on that lifesteal and tough. Yep. As the sad portal comes out.
Lead the target.
Blocking with Ash is fine here. You can develop a second Ash right afterwards. You do trade down the board. And so at this point, you're going to see the Brittle Steel come out. As the Brittle Steel comes out, now the Flash Freeze makes a lot more sense. Double Brittle Steel coming out, completely emptying his hand, but putting that in his favor. Post-combat, the Icefield Archer will be left, the Radiant Guardian will be left. Opts to save Ash in hand to drop it down. Probably the better play here.
Faster than my arrow.
Especially that it has the Omen Hawk buff. Good decision to do that. At this point, we're kind of waiting for a good top deck. That is an amazing top deck for Jeff. Jeff definitely wants to see that card develop. Alex drawing into an Icefield isn't going to do a ton for him this turn. He could use it if he wanted to stop a little bit of momentum if he thinks Jeff's going to attack, but at this point, it doesn't really make a ton of sense for Jeff to attack here at all. Alex looking at which unit to Frostbite, making that decision, ends up Frostbiting the Ash. And this is a pretty easy pass back. We're waiting for a big top deck from either player to get something going. And at this point, having a permanent Frostbite on the field is pretty strong. For kind of a big stalemate, neither player can really do anything without losing a lot of value. At this point, you probably block with the 4/2 and then let the other one through. You do want to protect your health. Blocking with the Ash. Don't want to do that. Alexa will allow everything through. Again, Jeff's probably going to have to draw something good in the next couple turns if he wants to win. If not, Alex has a stronger board state. Second Ash is really good. At this point, you can Frostbite the entire bench of Alex. Alex does have the Tavern Keeper, which he could use, but if I were in Jeff's shoes right here, it would be using the Shatter on one of the Yetis and a Frostbite on this other Yeti. Swinging in would Frostbite the remaining unit. And then this is just a lot of damage that you're pushing.
As the arrow flies.
Yep. Alex to open attack. He does have the combat trick to, if a Yeti blocks, to be able to trade the Yeti with the Ash. Attacks with only Ash. Looking like he's baiting out that 5/5. Alex is biting. So at this point, Jeff is saying, does he have a combat trick in his deck? He does not, so Frostbite goes through, and one of those Yetis are going to fall for a 3-mana card. That's a trade that Jeff's going to take every day of the week. Probably makes sense to pull down the Tavern Keeper. Alex elects to keep it in his hand.
I thought you'd run.
That Garen is a monster top deck. Alex, unfortunately, not getting as much, getting an Omen Hawk, something you're going to want to see earlier. The open attack here is correct. At this point, some hard decisions are going to have to be made. The 4-2 in front of the 5/5 makes perfect sense. Don't know if I block with the Ash. Maybe he thinks that the 4/4 has a little bit more value. This does put Ash into Brittle Steel range.
My heart and sword for the muscle.
Garen coming down is, again, pretty significant. Unless Alex draws some kind of strong buff, the Garen's going to be able to close out this game.
Welcome to the tipsy hour.
So unless Alex top decks something, he's got no real play here.
The frost reveals all.
You don't want to attack into a buffed Garen, especially if you can't do anything. Alex top decking his own Ash. At this point, his Ash is flipped. It would ensure that the next card that he does draw is the Ice Arrow.
We do what is right.
Unable to protect the Ash, no combat tricks at fast speed left in hand. Makes sense to go for that. You could see the double shatter to completely remove the Minotaur Reckoner.
I'll lead us to victory.
At this point, you gotta imagine that having the 3/1's not providing a ton of value here. The problem is the following turn, with one unit stunned, Ash frostbiting Garen, can Jeff hold off an attack with only 4 health remaining?
Stay resolute.
And so this is going back to some of those earlier rounds where Jeff did elect to take some hits. And unfortunately, it looks like it might cost him. Having the Ice Arrow come down on the Garen frostbites 2 units. It frostbites the Garen and the Ash. Probably the best play here. And then the open attack threatening the strongest unit, which in this case is the 4/4. Alex makes play with the arrow. Makes sense. Top decks the Sejuani. That's massive. At this point, it looks like Alex is in a position to close out this game. Jeff looking to shatter the Minotaur Reckoner, trying to prevent some of this damage. Unfortunately, when the second Sejuani comes down, it looks like it's going to be pretty much over.
Carved from the savage cold.
So at this point, Jeff has 0 blockers on his board. Developing the Yeti would give you 1, but at the same time, you can't stop two different units that both want, or that both represent lethal. If he did develop the Yeti and Ash attacked, it would still frostbite him. At this point, Jeff's out of this game. What could each player have done differently? I think having Alex develop a little bit more and using his combat tricks a little bit more aggressively earlier on to clear Ash and some of Jeff's value engines could have been beneficial. I think with Jeff, a lot of it was capitalizing on board state. Several of those times when the Ash, when the sentry was up, there was times when Jeff could have swung in a little bit harder in turn time 2. That's game 1.
Forgive me,
All right, we will. Alex will have to declare which deck that he's going to play for the next game. Then we'll hop right into it. Alex decides that for game 2, he is going to go with Zed Lucian. That is an Ionia Demacia. It's a very aggressive deck. Looking at Jeff's lists, Frostbite does perform okay against that, especially if you can get some of the bigger bodies down. Garen really kind of bricks that game plan. Another option would be the Karma Ezreal, having a lot of removal and stun. Being able to get an Ezreal on board, unless Alex draws into single combat, doesn't provide a lot of options. Jeff does go Karma Ezreal. Both players looking to mulligan now. Again, Jeff's going to want to be mulliganing aggressively for removal, keeping the Mystic Shot. Get excited in hand's good. Keeping the gotcha in your opening hand, or getting gotcha in your opening hand, is kind of a bummer. Alex hitting Lucian, Zed, Hunter's Resolve. Alex has a pretty strong curve. Developing the Lucian's pretty...
Don't get in my way.
It is risky in the sense that you're probably going to eat a Mystic Shot. At the same time, you know that lots of removal in his hand's probably going to lead that. He looks to let it go. That's the right decision. You're going to want to save Hunter's Resolve until you have a lot more on board. So developing the Chempunk could be pretty good here. Chempunk generating some spells.
Take from the rich, give to me.
So at this point, Alex has to decide, is it important that he gets one of his spells into hand? Those are a lot of survival skills, so this isn't the end of the world. This probably isn't a block that Alex wants to take. If Jeff attacks here, that is a trade that he is absolutely fine taking. So at this point, if you're Alex, you got to think through, do you want to let that through? Alex says, I'll take the trade.
Save me, Luke.
At that point, if you're going to make the trade, I think developing the Blade Scout probably would have been a smarter decision there if you were Alex. Developing a Blade Scout now doesn't make a ton of sense. It is going to be losing the elusive tag afterwards. Another Mystic Shot. Jeff is probably going to want to pre-commit a Mystic Shot onto the Zed. At this point, you might see Ranger's Resolve come down. Keeping Zed alive does make a lot of sense, and it does force out another removal spell. So at this point, Jeff has to decide, does playing Get Excited make sense? Do I want to let that resolve and Thermo Beam after combat? Probably going to be wanting to play either the Gotcha or the Get Excited. Gotcha is probably a little bit more awkward and keeps your hand big. Get Excited does cost less, but it would reduce your hand size. Gotcha does probably make the most sense here. Jeff in a position where he will eat 2 damage for his troubles, but overall, that's not too big of a deal. Jeff at this point working towards Ezreal level up, 2 of 6, feeling good. Probably going to be developing the Shadow Assassin next turn. Will is a pretty big hit. It's definitely what you want to see. Getting the Karma. Karma is going to be good. The biggest thing with trying to get Karma on board is you don't really want it to stop your tempo. You want to make sure that you have enough mana to deal with everything that the aggressive deck is looking at. Alex sitting on Zed, Highwayman, and Concussive. Concussive doesn't make a ton of sense here. Debating about developing the Zed. Unfortunately, if he does, Jeff does have a pretty easy Thermo Beam. Probably going to end the round right here. The one thing I would say is I think the attack does make sense. Again, if you can trade elusives in your Jeff, that's what you want to do. Thermo Beam comes down. It makes sense. You see one of them squishy units come down with only 2 health, and you just got to get rid of it. Alex kind of running out of steam. Not a whole lot left in his hand. He's got 2 Highwaymen,
We don't want any trouble.
which is going to make his board pretty wide. But at the same time, you can't really get your elusive hit in because there's this pesky Shadow Assassin sitting there. At this point, if you're Jeff, you're probably going to want to be playing reactively. What's kind of bad about developing Chump Wump, although you can block one of these units, it does tap you under Get Excited. Debating Concussive Palming the Shadow Assassin. He pulls it back, thinks about it again. Yep, Concussive Palms the Shadow Assassin. This is going to allow that Green Glade duo to get in. Again, Jeff is out of any kind of reactive spells. At this point, it's a safe bet, knowing that you've burned a Gotcha, you've burned a couple of Mystic Shots. So instead, Jeff cycles in some mushrooms. One thing about cycling in mushrooms is it's a really easy Ezreal trigger that you typically want to keep mushrooms until Ezreal is flipped. Once you do, those are free extra damage, especially if Karma is also enlightened. So at this point, Jeff needs to decide, does he get any more value from blocking the Chump Up somewhere else? He decides no. I also agree it's probably the right block. Alex's board is quite big. There's not any large threats on it. Developing the Karma is probably pretty safe here. It also allows you to Thermo Beam here. Goes in for an attack, see if he wants to trade. Alex was like, I'll take the 1 damage, not a big deal. Makes the most sense. We'll see if we see the Relentless Pursuit come down. Playing Karma here probably makes sense to start developing stuff, especially if you don't know that your opponent does have a Relentless Pursuit. At this point, Alex, if he wanted to, could develop and then push a little bit more damage, but he can't really push enough to get anything through. The 1 mana Thermo Beam on the Green Glade duo is primed here. Jeff says, yep, I agree, and takes it. It's a good move by Jeff. Generating a Thermo Beam here is phenomenal. You definitely don't want to play it for that much, and so developing an Ezreal here is okay.
Time for a true display of skill.
The Grizzled Ranger is a pretty good top deck. You could easily trade it into the Shadow Assassin, but at the end of the day, it's 3 damage. It's not too big of a deal. You could easily skip the block and then will it later. Even if you do take some damage here, you got to know that you are going to be generating Mystic Shots and an extra spell from Karma next turn anyway. That was the scout attack, so at this point, Alex could swing in pretty heavily if he wanted to. Deciding if the 1/2s are right to attack with as well probably makes sense. At this point, you can feel pretty safe about blocking with Karma. You can feel okay about blocking with Ezreal. It does lose a lot of value later.
You cannot escape.
No sweat.
Peace has its cost.
Makes the most sense. A play like this, it now makes sense to kind of Thermo Beam the 3/4. If he does, the Relentless Pursuit doesn't make any more sense afterwards. So at this point, if you're Alex, you're You're looking for another Lucian, you're looking for Senna, you're looking for Zed. Both players have an incredibly small hand. Not a lot of draw for either. Although Karma is generating value. Man, the Spirit's Refuge is an amazing card to get. This is very easy open attack with Ezreal. It's going to generate you a Mystic Shot. Work towards Ezreal level up. At this point, Jeff's in control. Alex doesn't really have the board state to deal with it, to apply any kind of pressure, and I don't know if there's a top deck that can really save him. At this point, I think if you're Jeff, you're feeling pretty comfortable and thinking about game 3. Mystic Shot on the unit makes sense. You're going to want to level up to Ezreal. Ezreal flips. This is big. And again, this would be a spot where if you had 2 Puff Caps, that's a free 2 damage right here. It's a free 4 damage if Karma's flipped. So having those mushrooms in hand are probably pretty good right about now. The Highwayman comes down. It does die to the Static Shock next turn, which is probably what Jeff's going to want to do. Floating this mana seems pretty okay. And again, Alex doesn't really have a lot going for him right now. Porokin's okay.
Peace begins within.
So at this point, Jeff kind of has the dream state. He's got his 2 big win cons on board. He's got a handful of spells. He's got a lot of reactivity. And unfortunately, anything that he puts down is going to get just destroyed by any of Jeff's removal. So Jeff can feel free to play really reactively. Static Shocking the Senna makes a lot of sense here. Electing to get rid of one of the units as opposed to going for the Nexus makes sense. That's fine. You could Poro Cannon away to get a couple more elusives. You could also drop the Shadow Assassin. Jeff wanting to go for the card draw. Getting into some lifesteal. Developing the Eye of the Dragon is really safe here. You already get the Dragonling, and it makes your open attack pretty strong. If I were Jeff, I'd be looking at developing the Eye. Yep, goes ahead and does it. Again, looking at Alex's hand, only sitting on a Relentless Pursuit. Not a ton he can do in this scenario. At this point, if you're playing Zed Lucian, you need to have won the game by now. Waiting this long until Karma, Ezreal are both online. Karma's duplicating spells. Ezreal is attacking your Nexus just by spells being played. Constant value being drawn. At this point, value is so far shifted towards Jeff that at this point it's borderline unwinnable. Attacking with everything but Karma makes a ton of sense here. The open attack makes a lot more sense. The Great Horn Companion does provide a pretty big body, although unfortunately, hard removal, which is very prevalent in Jeff's deck, kind of takes that out really, really hard.
Times are tough.
Blocks what he can. At this point, Jeff has lethal in his hand. Mystic Shot to face will deal 2 damage twice, plus a proc of Ezreal for each. And then Get Excited to face also procs. At this point, Jeff should just go for it. Yep, playing both. Looking at this is going to be quite a bit of spells, and that is going to be game 2. Alright, we're at game 3. Jeff has won with Ezreal Karma. Alex has won with his Freljord Overwhelm deck.
As it was meant to be.
This is best of 5, so each player will have to win with every single deck that they brought. Alex typing in, that was painful to me, an accident. Jeff bringing out his spiders. Looking at the remaining deck, it does make sense for Alex to run that one back. He does have lots of tempo plays. He does have lots of quick attack that's going to be good against spiders. What he needs to do is he needs to manage the board and prevent elusives from coming up too fast. Both players looking at their opening hands. Alex not immediately seeing Zed or Lucian digging for him, ends up with 2 Green Glade duos and a Senna. Jeff hits a pretty good curve. Precious Pet open attack makes a lot of sense. Developing into the House Spider on 2. You have a Vile Feast, and hopefully you draw into something a little bit cheaper before then. Another Precious Pet is great to see.
Everything's better with company.
Says you.
At this point, you could let that in, or you could easily just Vile Feast. Jeff elects to go for the Vile Feast. It's kind of too early to matter a ton. It's pretty flexible, and honestly, if you don't have Ranger's Resolve on board, it makes a lot of sense to do early. Hitting for 3 is okay. At this point, looking at your hand, Jeff had 2 units that he could have developed, which is a lot more than any of what Alex could have blocked. Even without knowing what Alex's hand is looking like, developing House Spider into a Precious Pet pushes potentially 5 more damage and trades units. And especially because of how many units Jeff has, he's not overly scared of that.
I'm what nightmares
Developing the Senna. It's an okay choice. Again, Senna's not going to be a very good blocker for you. While also having the Zed in hand, probably looking to develop the Zed next turn. Although it does allow you to, if you draw into a Lucian, develop Lucian Senna on board, which is pretty hard to deal with. So at this point, Jeff has a pretty easy Culling Strike on the Zed that pushes 6 damage. It does pretty good against Jeff's deck. So at this point, you're probably looking at the Senna and thinking, I'll let that through. Jeff may elect to block with a 1/1. At this point, you're not gaining a ton from doing so. Your health's okay, and you're sitting on Grasp. So I would probably have let that through, especially when you have the Arachnoid Host in hand. At that point, that 1/1 spider is now a 3/1 spider and pushing a lot more damage. So the Arachnoid Host makes a ton of sense to drop here before attacking. Jeff looking like he's going for the open attack. Again, you just missed out on a lot of potential damage there. And you got to think about, even if he does develop a unit, trading any of your units into him is going to be way more worth it, especially if you're pushing an extra 2, 4, 6 damage. That's the difference between having an enemy Nexus health of 8 and having an enemy Nexus health of 2. Jeff playing reactive. Keeping Alex's board small and just swarming, doing what Spider Deck should do. At this point, Jeff's probably looking to max out his board and end the game in an open attack here. With 2 Relentless Pursuits in hand, you could do quite a bit here. It does make a lot of sense to attack in with Zed Senna and then double Relentless Pursuit. You do have enough mana to put Keeper of the Masks and do the double Relentless Pursuit, but at this point, if you're Alex, you should be swinging in, and then you should be pursuing multiple times. The only thing that would really stop you from doing so is if Jeff grasps here. And unfortunately, not a ton you can do about that. And so now Alex's biggest concern is surviving the next turn. So the Highwayman gives you 2 blockers. Unfortunately, nothing on his board but Senna can block these Precious Pets. Jeff now with a full board, 2 Arachnoid Hosts in hand.
You have to get me out of here.
You're probably also going to want to be getting rid of 1 Spiderling just so you have board space for the Arachnoid Host. It'd be pretty easy to block into Keeper of the Masks. The House Spider into the 1/2 makes a lot of sense. That deck doesn't really run a lot of 1 damage pings. Pretty solid block by Jeff. So now if you're Alex, you're thinking, what tempo plays do I have? Alexa go for the Relentless Pursuit here. Not a ton of pressure on board. Still having 2 units you can safely attack with, but Alexa attack with everything. I guess he's thinking more so if you get the 1/1 body and you can trade it for one of Jeff's, it makes a whole lot of sense. If you're Jeff, you probably let that through. Again, the biggest thing is this spider has a lot more potential value than just a 1/1 token because of this Arachnoid Host. At the same time, you could be blocking, you could get blocked, but I mean, if both of these fearsome spiders go up to 2/2, it makes a lot more sense. So Arachnoid Host is a huge bomb here. It threatens Senna. So attacking with everything here is probably Jeff's best bet. He does want something to die so he can Crawling Sensation into another Arachnoid Host. So the first 2 spiders do threaten lethal. He will have to be sacking his Senna here, and again, very familiar to last game, stuck with a Great Horn Companion in hand. Has to take 4 damage, trades away the Highwayman for one of the spiders. But unfortunately, where one spider goes down, more spiders come back. Just got to be feeling pretty good with where he's at right now. He's got a lot of Nexus health. Both players only have 1 card left. They're both kind of out of steam. Grasp is a huge draw here. If this Great Horn comes down, it's a pretty easy attack or block with the 5/2. There's the thought of just grasping the illusion. So if you're Jeff here, you block with a 5/2 100% of the time. That makes the most sense. You just got rid of a big blocker, and then the Arachnoid Host comes down. That's an easy drop here. And at this point, unless Alex draws something big, he is going to be unable to block anything. Kind of a last-ditch effort. If you're Jeff, you are wary of this one combat trick, but Alex doesn't really have anything, so he just lets it go. If you're Alex, you probably play the Relentless Pursuit for fun. And at this point, if you're Jeff, you know you win. So you can just pass and move on to the next game, looking at game 4. Yep, so full swing in. That ends game 3. Jeff, at this point, 1 game left to go before he wins. He's going to be back on his first deck throughout the rest of this tournament match. He needs to win with his Freljord Demacia Garen Ash deck. Well, hopefully he does know that this is best of 5. Alex looking like the game is done. I'm going to make sure we're respectating. Seems like they're having a little bit of trouble getting going. Game begins. Alex Alex sticking with his guns, playing Zed Lucian for the third game in a row. Again, this is a good deck. He just really needs to hit that curve, and he needs to keep his units alive. Jeff keeping a majority of his hand. Alex looking at his own. Has a 1-2 curve, but is not seeing any of his champions. Omen Hawk comes down. It's a great opening start. That's a trade that you will take 10 out of 10 times if you're Jeff. Look at Alex. Alex has a Green Glade in hand, a Great Horn Companion, the Highwayman, and a Relentless Pursuit, which hasn't gotten him a lot of mileage. So unfortunately, now that the Blade Scout has been played, the Conspirator doesn't make a ton of sense to play, so he develops into the Green Glade. The Frostbite prevents that from dealing any damage. Shatter is a good removal tool, especially paired with the Ice Veil. Alex drawing into his second Relentless Pursuit. Again, unless you have the board state, unfortunately that doesn't do a ton of work for you. Alex is probably going to want to be skipping that block. Probably developing the Highwayman into the Conspirator. Instead, trades his Elusive. That's not a great trade. Alex is not going to want to be doing that. He's going to be wanting pushing more damage. He is supposed to be the faster deck, and Jeff going for the ramp, which is going to put him at 5 mana. If he top decks a Garen, that would be best case scenario.
Looking for a daring escape.
Pulls back the Highwayman. That is going to allow him to get a second Highwayman for free.
A true Felurian welcome.
But again, the Frostbite comes down, and there's just not a ton he can do here. Again, from Alex's point of view, his deck is going to want to out-tempo and just really push damage fast, especially without any kind of late-game bomb. If you run out of cards in your hand and run out of steam, the game's done. Jeff is doing a good job stabilizing. He's got a couple good blocks here. The 2-2 makes a ton of sense to block into. You can push the Warding Stones. Alex has not shown any combat tricks or any kind of damage pings, any kind of damage buffs yet.
Stay back.
And Jeff deciding that he's just going to trade all the way down.
We've been through a lot.
There is a question of whether or not you go for Shatter here. It does get rid of one of the units. It does make your hand small and give you less flexibility later. Jeff kind of thinking about what he wants to do, develops into the Poro. Jeff having 2 big buff cards in hand, not really any great target, draws into what could be a pretty good target. Having the Rhyme Tusk come down is pretty significant. It kind of stops the game.
Of an ice-shrouded world.
At this point, even developing into the Great Horn Companion, that's going to permanently frostbitten.
Ice runs in our veins.
Drawing into the Zed is very good here. If you're Jeff, you're going to want to be instantly frostbiting that. At this point, you want to pre-commit the Ghost if you're Alex. Which he does. This is not going to give that effect to the Shadow, and so it does get a good block with Garen. You can block here. And then if you're Alex, you're probably looking to pursue. This is prime pursuit value. You're going to get 2 more attacks with Zed. He's out of an elusive blocker, and he doesn't have a great blocker to block your other Shadow. We could see the Take Heart here and see that Garen get very big. At that point, you're going to wonder, does it make sense to Relentless Pursuit? Leveling Garen is nice. Leveling Garen on a turn when you are already getting the attack token the following turn isn't the greatest feeling in the world. So at this point, Jeff gets an action. He can decide, do I want to take Heart with Garen? Do I want to Frostbite the Zed? What do I want to do here? If I were him, probably Frostbiting the Zed makes the most sense here. It prevents just 2 units from coming out to attacking, especially an elusive one. Looking to go for the Take Heart on the Shadow Clone and flipping the Garen. Again, that's totally something you can do. It just feels less impactful when you're already getting the attack token on the next turn. Alex, not even going to be able to get Zed to flip here, is now looking at a very large Garen. This is a 9/9 Garen, which is constantly going to be regenerating its health. At that point, you have to wonder, is there anything I can really do to remove that? And do I have enough tempo to beat him through it? Attacking here is fine. At this point, with the having a full Nexus health, you don't really have to block it immediately. The Zed is no longer elusive, and so you can't really attack with Zed anymore unless you draw into another elusive card, or if you block Garen or something big enough.
The frost reveals all to me.
Drawing Lucian here is pretty nice, although it is too little too late. There's not a ton that Lucian can do while surviving constant attacks from Garen. Attacking with Garen here is pretty straightforward. Pinging the 0/5 for one damage is pretty good. It opens it up to a shatter play. If you do shatter it, at that point Zed becomes the Rime Tusk target, and at that point it's hard for Alex to attack with literally anything. Again, with a Relentless Pursuit in hand that you really can't use, kind of hard. There is an idea of using Ranger's Resolve here. You don't really want to lose that card. It does kind of represent your last hope of getting Zed to do anything. The only really way that you could win this game if you're Alex is to drawing another Ghost or getting through this wall with elusive damage. And to do that, you're going to need to keep a big body on board. So he's thinking, is there a better time to use this? Looks like he's going to let it through. Nope, plays Ranger's Resolve. Unfortunately for him, Jeff has another one in hand. And if you're Jeff, you're probably playing that. Let's go for the redoubled Valor. I mean, you can. The biggest thing is, like, at this point, stats don't really do anything for you because you're going to have to block that with something regardless.
Like my blade?
Yeah, so whether you're at 99 or 18, it doesn't do a ton for you unless you can actually hit the Nexus. Especially without Overwhelm, doesn't really do anything.
Sends chills up my spine.
So if you're Jeff, you attack with everything right now. You full swing in. Because you do have Brittle Steel in hand, you can threaten anything else.
Just need a target.
Alex does draw into the Conspirator. One thing he can do is he could bring back the Great Horn Beast and have it come back out. But again, you just had no blocker for this Garen. This is an 18 Garen. This is a massive Garen.
Stand and fight.
The only way you're going to get through this Garen is elusive damage.
I failed.
Ooh. And now that that's come down, Alex, with nothing else he can play in hand, has to develop a unit, or else Jeff's open attack will kill him after the pass back. Does drone to Zed. Unfortunately, that Zed is going to have to be a Garen walker.
Do not fear the shrouded path.
There is no shelter.
I am a true master.
At this point, the open attack ends the game.
Shatter them.
Good series. Jeff is our 3rd place winner for the tournament. So congrats to him. Well played on both. Alex having an incredible run, making it out of pools, and making it this far in the tournament is nothing to laugh about. Both of these players finishing 3rd and 4th, great runs. Those were great games.